The sound of spilled KFT's rain had just stopped when Keanu Reeves stepped into the small cafe on the corner of 7th and Pine. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where time seemed to move a little slower and people spoke in softer voices. He wore a simple black jacket, a faded backpack slung over one shoulder, and his hair was still damp from the walk. Most people didn't recognize him right away. That was the way he liked it. He was known to disappear into places where no one expected to see a man like him. Hollywood often painted him in big lights and grand entrances. But he found comfort in places where no one asked for selfies. He ordered a plain black coffee, nodded politely at the barista, and turned to look for a seat. But then, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the cafe, near the window where the light barely reached, a man in his 50s struggled to balance a tray in one hand and a white cane in the other. The man's sunglasses were slightly crooked, and his coffee cup tilted dangerously. The moment slowed down as if life itself was holding its breath. The tray slipped. Coffee spilled across the table, over the man's fingers and down onto the floor. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. A few people looked away. Others glanced awkwardly, unsure of what to do. A young woman at the next table hesitated but didn't move. The man stood frozen, a look of quiet defeat on his face. Keanu didn't pause, walked straight over, his steps quiet but sure, and gently reached for the tray. "May I help?" asked in a soft voice. The man flinched, then turned slightly. "I'm fine," he said, though his hands shook. Keanu didn't push. He placed the tray on the table, careful not to touch anything else, and then crouched to clean the spill with napkins the barista had handed him silently. Worked calmly, his movements respectful, almost reverent. "You're not a barista," the man muttered, confused. Keanu smiled. "No, just someone who's dropped a few cups in his time." The man let out a small laugh, and for the first time, tension in his shoulders eased. Keanu sat beside him, not across. Close enough to show he wasn't going anywhere, but not so close as to invade his space. He placed a fresh cup of coffee on the table. "Cream?" Keanu asked. "Just black," the man replied, then added, "You have a kind voice." Keanu didn't respond to that. He simply nodded and let silence settle in like a warm blanket. After a few moments, the man turned slightly toward him. "Name's David," said, offering his hand in the general direction of Keanu's voice. "Keanu," replied, shaking it gently. A long silence followed, but not the awkward kind. It was the silence that lets two strangers breathe in the same space without the need to fill it with noise. Outside, the rain started again. Inside, the rest of the cafe had returned to its normal hum, but something had shifted. People glanced over now and then, eyes flicking from David to the man beside him. A few recognized him. Phones stayed down, though. No one dared break the moment. "Do you come here often?" David asked. Keanu shook his head. "First time." "Passing through? Lucky me," David said with a chuckle. But the smile faded quickly. "Most people walk past. Even when I trip or drop something, they pretend not to see." Keanu's face grew serious. "I see you." Those 3 words landed like thunder. David looked down at his hands, now wrapped tightly around the warm coffee cup. His knuckles were pale. "I wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "I lost my sight 2 years ago, accident at work. Construction site collapse. They said I was lucky to survive. Some days I believe them." Keanu didn't speak. "My wife left a month after it happened. Said she couldn't handle it. My daughter, she calls on holidays. That's about it." David cleared his throat. His voice wavered. "I come here because it's the only place that still smells like home. Fresh coffee, rain on concrete. Sound of pages turning." Keanu reached into his bag and pulled out a small book, a worn copy of Siddhartha. He placed it on the table and slid it toward. "David, want me to read something?" David blinked behind his glasses. "Why?" Keanu shrugged. "Because I've got time and you've got ears." The line made David laugh again, louder this time. It was rusty, but real. Keanu began reading, his voice steady, slow, and soft. Each word rolled out like a calm river. David leaned back in, His chair, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to memorize the sound. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 15, but for David, time stopped. When the barista walked over later to clear the spill, she whispered something to Keanu. He nodded, stood, and walked to the counter, paid for David's coffee, and 10 more visits. If he ever comes back, Keanu said quietly, make sure he gets what he needs. And if he drops something again, don't wait. She nodded, her eyes wet. But Keanu didn't return to David. He didn't say goodbye. He simply left the cafe without fanfare. David sat at the window for a long time, sipping coffee he didn't remember ordering, listening to the sound of rain, and feeling something he hadn't in years, seen, heard, valued. And the next day, when he came back to the same table, the barista had already set a cup of black coffee waiting for him, and beside it, a new book in Braille, quietly donated by a stranger who never said his last name. The kindness didn't end there. David returned to the cafe every morning after that day. Same table, same time. The seat by the window now felt like his. The barista, Sarah, always greeted him with a warm voice, letting him know his coffee was ready and waiting. She'd even started playing soft jazz music on the speakers, knowing David liked the sound of real instruments. But more than the music or the coffee, something had changed inside David. He felt less invisible, like the world hadn't forgotten him after all, and he owed that feeling to a man who never even said goodbye. A few days later, Sarah quietly placed a package in front of David. Someone dropped this off for you, she said softly. David carefully ran his fingers over the box. It was wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a new walking cane, lighter than the one he used, with a built-in sensor that vibrated near obstacles. There was no note, no name, but David knew. He smiled as he held the cane. Keanu, he whispered to himself. Meanwhile, across the city, Keanu sat alone in a quiet bookstore. He had thought about returning to the cafe, maybe checking in on David. But something told him it was better this way. Quiet kindness, no spotlight. He believed in doing good without needing thanks, and he had done what he could, or so he thought. That evening, while walking through a side street, Keanu saw a group of teenagers huddled around a bench. A man sat in the middle, clutching his backpack like it was the last thing he owned. His clothes were torn, his shoes had holes, and his eyes darted nervously. Keanu knew that look, fear mixed with shame. The teens were laughing, tossing coins at his feet, taunting him. Dance for us, old man. One of them sneered. Keanu stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push anyone, simply walked between them and knelt beside the man. Hi, he said gently. Can I sit here? The man nodded, unsure. The teens grew silent. Keanu looked up at them, his face calm. You boys ever been scared to sleep? He asked. Ever prayed for the night to end before it even began? None of them answered. Keanu took off his jacket and handed it to the man. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out some cash, enough for a meal, maybe 2. He handed it over and stood up. Go home, he said to the boys. Find your kindness before the world teaches you how much it hurts to lose it. The teens left without a word. The man on the bench looked up at him with tears in his eyes. Why? He asked. Keanu just smiled. Because I see you. Next morning, David returned to the cafe again. Time, Sarah had more than just coffee. You won't believe who came in last night, she said excitedly. There's a video going viral. Someone filmed Keanu helping a homeless man right on the street, just like he helped you. David's heart skipped. He's still out there. David asked. Sarah nodded, doing what he does, changing people, one small act at a time. She placed a tablet in front of him and tapped play. David listened. He heard Keanu's voice. The same calm tone, the same powerful silence between words. He smiled to himself. Maybe, he whispered, it's my turn now. That afternoon, David stayed longer than usual. He asked Sarah to describe everyone who came into the cafe, their clothes, their expressions, how they moved. You never used to ask about that, she said curiously. David smiled. I'm trying to see more of the way he did. Then a woman walked in, soaking wet from the rain. She sounded tired. Her voice was soft but heavy, like she carried too much. She struggled with her bag, knocked over a menu, and apologized to everyone near her. "She sounds nervous," David said. Sarah nodded. "She looks nervous too." "Then I'll buy her coffee," David said. Sarah blinked. "You sure?" "Yes," and give her my seat. "But where will you sit?" David stood and tapped the table twice. "I'll stand today. Kindness has to keep moving outside." Keanu watched from across the street. He had come to check on David just once, just to make sure the light hadn't faded. And when he saw David, giving up his seat, handing kindness to a stranger, he smiled. He turned and walked away. He didn't need to go in. His job here was done. When a stranger listened, the next few days passed quietly. David kept showing up at the cafe. Same time, same table, except now he wasn't just listening to the music or sipping coffee. He was paying attention, really paying attention. To the voices, to the footsteps, to the moods in the room. He had started recognizing the regulars by their shoes or how they dragged their chairs. The young woman who always dropped her keys. The man who stirred his tea exactly 7 times. Sarah even started telling him stories about customers who came in when he wasn't there. But on Thursday morning, something unusual happened. A man entered with a dog, not just any dog, but a service dog. He was young, maybe late 20s, with rough hands and shoulders that sagged from invisible weight. His name was Elliot. Sarah later whispered that he used to be in the army, had seen things, survived things. But something about the war never left him. Elliot sat in the corner, barely touched his drink, and stared into space like the whole world was behind glass. David could feel his presence. Not just because of the dog's quiet breathing or the way chairs shifted, but because Elliot's silence was loud. It filled the room like smoke. After a while, David stood and walked slowly toward him. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Elliot looked up, surprised. Sure. David sat down. His hands gently rested on the cane across his lap. "Your dog's trained well," he said. Elliot nodded. "She's better than I deserve." "Nah," David replied. "You showed up. That counts." There was a long pause. "You always talk to strangers?" Elliot asked. "I didn't," David said. "But someone once sat beside me when I needed it. So now, I try." Elliot shifted in his seat. His fingers traced the rim of his cup. "I don't talk much," he said. "Then don't," David smiled. "Just listen." And David told him a story, not about his blindness, not about his pain, but about his joy. He spoke of music he used to play. The first time he held his newborn daughter, the way warm bread smelled when his mother used to bake it. He described the sound of the ocean waves hitting rocks during a summer he barely remembered. He painted a picture with his voice, not of sadness, but of life, slowly. Elliot relaxed, and then he spoke. About the nights overseas. About his best friend who never made it home. About how he sometimes woke up gasping, not knowing where he was. About the silence that came after the bullets, and how it never really left. "I came here today," Elliot whispered, "because I didn't know where else to go." David nodded. Sometimes the quiet places are where healing begins. At that moment, the cafe wasn't just a cafe. It was something softer, something sacred. And behind the counter, Sarah wiped her eyes. That evening, Keanu Reeves sat on a bench in the park nearby, watching the sky turn gold. A young man walked past him, dragging a violin case. He looked tired, maybe even lost. Keanu stood. "You play?" he asked. The man nodded. "Used to." Atunu tilted his head. "What stopped you?" The man said with a shrug. Keanu reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded flyer. "A local event. Open mic night at a community hall." He handed it over. "Play," Keanu said. "Not for applause. For yourself." The man looked at him curiously. "Why do you care?" Keanu just smiled. "Because someone once let me feel seen." When I was fading, the man looked down at the flyer. "You going to be there?" Keanu stood up. Maybe not. But you should." The next morning, David arrived at the cafe to find a folded note on his table. No name, just words. Thank you for listening. I didn't know I needed that. I'll come back. Next time, with my guitar. David smiled. He slid the note into his pocket and turned his face toward the sunlit window. You were right, Keanu, he whispered. Kindness doesn't stop with one person. It keeps going. Just then, Sarah placed a hot cup of coffee in front of him and said, Someone paid for your drinks for the whole month. Who? David asked. She smiled. He didn't leave a name, but they both knew. Miles away, Keanu walked into a small diner with no cameras and no crowd. He sat alone, quietly reading a book. But even from far away, he was still lighting candles in the lives of strangers, one act at a time. A ripple becomes a wavetti sound of the bell above the cafe door had become something comforting. David, now a familiar face in the little corner near the window, could tell who entered just by the way they walked. But this morning, there was a different kind of energy in the air, a quiet buzz that hinted something was about to shift. Sarah approached his table, her voice low and curious. You've been inspiring people, you know that? David tilted his head. What do you mean? Pulled out her phone and placed it gently in front of him. Someone started a post about your story. About what Keanu did here. It's how you started talking to strangers, how you helped Elliot. It's spreading fast. David's fingers brushed over the table, but I didn't do anything big. Sarah smiled. You didn't have to. How small? Spark is enough. Now people are showing up here just to see if it's true. True enough. Just then, the door opened and a woman with 2 children walked in, looked around nervously, and asked Sarah in a shy voice, Is this the Kindness Cafe? David's eyes widened. Kindness Cafe? Sarah chuckled. That's what people are calling it online. Soon, it wasn't just the regulars coming in. People from different parts of the city stopped by, some curious, others hopeful. Woman left a note on the table. Thank you for reminding me that people still care. A teenage boy brought his guitar and played near the back wall without saying a word. A man in a wheelchair came in, and 3 customers rushed to clear a space. For him, without hesitation, every moment felt different now. Not just because of David, not just because of Keanu, but because kindness had become the unspoken rule of the room. Meanwhile, it's in another part of the city. Keanu sat in a hospital waiting room. No one recognized him. He was visiting an old friend, a stuntman who had taken a fall during a shoot. As he waited, Keanu watched an elderly woman struggling to fill out a medical form. Her hands shook, and her lips moved as she tried to understand each question. Keanu got up and sat beside her. May I help you with that? He asked. She blinked, surprised. Oh, you don't have to. I know, he said gently. But I'd like to. He read each line slowly, guiding her through the questions. When they were done, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. No one's been this patient with me in a long time. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. You deserve it. Before he left, he wrote something on the back of the form and folded it into her hand. It was the address of the cafe. Under it, he wrote, If you ever need a warm drink and a kind word, go here. Ask for David. Back at the cafe, David was now spending more time talking to new people. One by one, they came with their stories. And one by one, David listened. A college student sat across from him and confessed he was failing classes and didn't know how to tell his parents. David told him about the time he failed a math exam and thought the world was ending, and how his mother made him pancakes anyway. An old man sat with him and said he hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. David asked him about his favorite memory, and they ended up laughing over stories about fishing trips and burnt marshmallows. The kindness wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was steady. And then one day it happened. Keanu walked back into the cafe. It was quiet at first. No one noticed. He wore a hoodie, kept his head low, and ordered a coffee like anyone else. But David turned his head just slightly. Something about the air changed. You're here, David said softly. Keanu walked over and sat across from him. I wanted to see what you built, he said. I didn't build it, David replied. You did? Keanu shook his head. Why? Just handed you a cup of coffee. You turned it into something more. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah brought over 2 coffees without a word, placing them between the two men like offerings of peace and gratitude. You know, Keanu said after a while, I've been to a lot of places. But this is something special. It's not the place, David said, smiling. It's the people. People like you, who remind others that it's okay to care. Keanu reached into his jacket and placed a folded paper on the table. I want to help. Quietly. No press. No attention. Just more kindness. David opened the paper slowly. It was a check. Not for thousands, but for enough. Enough to help the cafe upgrade their chairs, add ramps for accessibility. Maybe even start a small fund for anyone who needed a meal and couldn't pay. You sure? David asked. Keanu looked at him with steady eyes. Kindness is only real when we pass it on. That night, Sarah closed the cafe with tears in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the weight of something beautiful. People didn't just come for coffee. Anymore, they came to feel human again. They came to believe in goodness. And it all started with a blind man, a spilled tray, and a stranger who knelt down instead of walking away. One voice can heal many. 3 weeks had passed since Keanu returned to the cafe. He never stayed long. Sometimes he just sat outside, sipping his coffee quietly, nodding at people walking in. Sometimes he slipped inside unnoticed and left little things: a book, a prepaid tab, or a folded note with a simple line of encouragement. He always signed those notes the same way, a friend, but David knew. Sarah knew. And soon, more people knew. The Kindness Cafe, once just a quiet little shop on a sleepy street, had become a place of healing. One morning, David arrived earlier than usual. Sarah met him at the door with a gentle smile. We have a visitor today, she whispered. Someone new? Someone very special. He heard the shuffle of soft steps behind her. A child's voice. Are you the man who talks to people? The little girl asked. David turned his head toward the voice. Depends. He said kindly, Do you want someone to talk to? My mom cries at night, the girl said. But she won't tell me why. The room fell still. A woman stepped forward quickly, embarrassed, gently placing her hand on the girl's shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered to David. She's just... very open. David smiled warmly. It's nothing to apologize for. She's brave. The woman sighed. We saw the post about your cafe. I don't know what I expected, but just needed a place where no one would judge. David reached across the table and gently patted the seat next to him. Sit, he said. You don't have to explain anything. Just be. They did. They stayed for hours, and when they left, the woman hugged Sarah at the counter and whispered, You saved more than just my morning. That same evening, Elliot, the army vet, returned, this time not alone. He brought his younger brother Josh, who had recently lost his job and had begun slipping into depression. Elliot believed in silence, but Josh needed something else. Something louder. Sarah allowed Josh to use the small corner stage that they never really used. And when Josh picked up a guitar and played the first note, everyone paused. His voice cracked. His fingers trembled, but David stood from his seat and spoke without fear. Keep going, he said. We all need to hear it. Josh played through the entire song. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After he finished, the whole cafe clapped, not politely, not out of pity, but out of connection. That night, people stayed longer than usual. They talked to strangers, offered to help one another with real things, job leads, childcare, just someone to call. It wasn't about fixing people. It was about showing up. Keanu returned the next day. This time, he stayed for hours. He sat with Elliot, with Josh, with a woman whose husband had left, with a man who just lost his dog. He didn't pretend to have answers. He just listened. And then he asked something surprising. David said, Would you consider doing a talk? A what? A conversation? Somewhere people can listen? Bigger space, more people? David hesitated. I'm not a speaker. No. You're already speaking, Keanu said gently. Every time you listen to someone, you're speaking to them. You're reminding them they matter. Sarah nodded. He's right. David thought about it for a long time, and he finally said, "Only if you're standing beside me." Keanu smiled. "I'll be right there." A week later, they held their first community night at the library hall next door. They called it a circle of light. There were no cameras, no press, just chairs in a circle and people who needed a place to sit. David sat in the center, his cane beside him, his hands gently folded. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a story. "World went dark 2 years ago," he said. "But I didn't feel blind until people stopped seeing me. One day, I spilled coffee, thought I was invisible, till someone sat next to me." He smiled in Keanu's direction, and that moment changed my life. He looked around the room. "Maybe you're here tonight because something hurts. Maybe you're lonely or tired or afraid. I want you to know something." He paused. "You are not alone. Someone sees you. Right here, right now." The room went quiet, and then one voice spoke up. "My son hasn't talked to me in a year." An older woman said softly, "My husband lost his job and stopped smiling." Another whispered, "I've been thinking about ending it," man said with shaking hands. The air grew thick with emotion. David didn't break down. He nodded with deep, steady compassion. "You're still here," he said. "That means there's still hope." People leaned on one another that night. Strangers held hands. Tears flowed. But not the kind that break you, the kind that clean something inside. Keanu stood silently behind David. Hands in his pockets, eyes full of something quiet and powerful. And when the evening ended, people didn't want to leave. They lingered. They helped stack chairs. They hugged. And they whispered promises to keep showing up for each other. The ripple had become a wave, and it all began with a single act of kindness, and a man who refused to walk away. The man who gave people back to themselves. The sky was still dark when David arrived at the cafe. He liked coming early now, before the world fully woke, before the air filled with voices and clinking mugs. There was a stillness in the morning that reminded him of what mattered. He sat at his usual spot near the window, listening to the soft hum of the city stretching itself awake. He ran his fingers across the smooth table surface and smiled. He could still remember the exact feeling of spilled coffee, the moment that had once felt like the worst part of his day. And now, strangely, it had become the beginning of everything. The bell rang gently. It was Sarah. "You're early," she whispered. "Habit," David said with a small smile. "Big night tonight," she added. "You nervous?" He paused. "Not really, 'cause this time it's not about me, it's about all of us." She poured him his usual black coffee, then placed a folded piece of paper in front of him. "Someone dropped this off for you?" she said. David opened the note carefully. The handwriting was neat. "Familiar? You saw me when I was disappearing? Now I'm helping others stay seen. Thank you, David. You changed my life." It was signed simply, Elliot. He closed the note and held it to his chest. That evening, the library hall was packed, far more than last time. Chairs filled quickly. People stood along the walls. Few even sat on the floor. They had no big lights, no stage, no microphones. Just people. David sat in the center again. Keanu beside him, quiet as ever. Sarah on his other side. Elliot near. The front, Josh with his guitar resting against the wall. The little girl who had once walked in with her mother now held a notebook and passed out small paper stars with kind words written on them. Each person was a part of this. David spoke. But he didn't tell a new story. He told the same one. The one people needed to hear again and again. "It started with a cup of coffee," he said, "and a stranger who chose to sit beside me instead of walking away." He took a deep breath. "I didn't know that moment would save my life. And I didn't know I would go on to help save others. But that's the beauty of kindness. It never ends where it begins." He gestured gently toward the people in the room. "Every person here matters. Every story is needed. Even the ones you haven't told yet." There were no tears this time, just stillness and understanding. Keanu finally spoke just one line. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You gave people back to themselves." The room was silent. Those words hung in the air like soft music. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't even about being healed. It was about belonging, and as people left that night, many hugged David. Others left folded notes. One man whispered, "I was planning to leave the city, but now I think I'll stay." One woman placed a candle on the windowsill of the cafe later that night, lit it, and walked away. No words, just light, and more candles followed. The next morning when David came back, the window was glowing with them. The Kindness Cafe had become more than a place. It had become a symbol, not just of what one man did, but of what anyone can do. Weeks passed, life moved forward. Some people stopped visiting. Their lives grew busy again. But they left something behind. A story, a smile, a moment of connection. That remained. David never tried to be a hero. He just kept showing up. So did Keanu. Sometimes in silence, sometimes from afar, but always with the same quiet belief that the smallest act of care can echo farther than we ever imagine. One evening, as the sun dipped below the buildings, David sat at his usual table. A young woman entered, eyes red from crying. She looked around, unsure. David heard the hesitation in her breath. He turned toward her gently. "Do you want to sit?" he asked softly. She nodded, and just like that, the story began again.